All right, ready to unlock some serious inner power. We're going deep with Brian Tracy's The Power of Self-Confidence, a book packed with strategies to help you become, well, the most confident you.
And the best part is, it's not just theory. Tracy really delivers practical tools you can use right away to boost that self-belief.
Right off the bat, I was struck by his idea that you become what you think about. I mean, we've all heard that before, but he dives deep, doesn't he?
Absolutely. He calls it the law of attraction and the law of correspondence. Think of your mind like a garden, right? Your thoughts are the seeds. If you're planting doubt and fear, well, guess what you're going to get? Weeds. But if you're intentional, if you focus on what you want, those seeds can blossom into incredible things.
It's like you're saying, okay, universe, this is what I'm after, and then watch out.
Exactly. And that's where setting clear goals comes in. It's like having a roadmap to your own success, which fuels your self-belief along the way.
Having that clear vision, knowing where you're headed, that's huge, isn't it?
Huge. But there's another layer to this. Tracy says it's not just about setting any old goals, it's about making sure they line up with your core values.
So integrity is key here, right? That's where real confidence starts to solidify, according to Tracy.
100%. Living in sync with those values, even when it's tough, it creates this inner peace, this self-respect that's unshakable. It's not always a walk in the park, but man, it's worth it.
He even has that exercise, right? The one where you write your own eulogy.
Yeah.
I have to admit, at first I was like, whoa, that's kind of intense. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it's actually brilliant.
Right, because it forces you to confront, like, what do I want to be remembered for? Not just accomplishments, but the kind of person you were, your character, your impact.
It's like defining your legacy, but on your own terms.
And that ties directly into what Tracy calls the law of reversibility. It means that acting in line with your values actually makes those values stronger inside you.
It's like a muscle. You work it out, it gets stronger.
Yes, it's a feedback loop of integrity.
Yeah.
You act with integrity, you feel more integrated. It's incredible, right?
Totally. The more you live by those values, the more they become a part of who you are, which just reinforces that inner strength.
And here's where it gets really fascinating. Tracy argues that when you face challenges to those values, when they're put to the test, it's like this mental heat that forges them even stronger, like steel in a fire.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
So it's about leaning into those challenges because coming out the other side, it's like, yeah, I faced that and my integrity is still intact. That's got to feel amazing.
It does. You prove to yourself on a deep level what you're truly made of. It's powerful stuff, and it all connects back to that purpose and personal power theme he talks about.
Right. Having that sense of purpose, that's huge. It's like this driving force that can really propel you forward.
100%. It can be the fuel for incredible positive change in your life.
You know, it reminds me of this friend I have. He was a smoker, like forever. Tried to quit so many times, but just couldn't kick it. And then one day, it was like a switch flipped in his brain. He just decided, like, with every fiber of his being, that he was done. And that was it. Cold turkey. He quit.
Wow.
Yeah. And, you know, I think that's a perfect example of what Tracy's talking about, right? It's like when you tap into that deep belief in yourself, that inner power, you become practically unstoppable.
Absolutely. He talks about self-efficacy, which is that feeling of, I can do this. The more you experience that, the more your confidence soars.
It's like proving to yourself that you're capable.
Mm.
And the more you prove it, the more you believe it.
It's this awesome cycle of success. You set a goal that aligns with your values, you take action, you see results, and boom, your confidence gets a boost, which motivates you to set even bigger goals.
So we've got these values-based goals, a powerful sense of purpose, and we're backing it all up by taking action and getting things done. So where do we direct all this energy? Where does Tracy say we should focus to really tap into that inner powerhouse?
He says it's about finding your zone of genius, that sweet spot where your talents and passions collide.
Oh, I love that. Tell me more about this zone of genius.
So imagine feeling totally energized by your work, like you're in flow because it just fits who you are deep down. That's the power of operating in that zone.
It's like finding that missing puzzle piece, right? Everything just clicks into place.
Exactly. And the cool thing is, Tracy gives you these 6 questions, these self-assessment questions, to help you figure out what that zone is for you.
Oh, I like that. So it's not just some vague idea. He gives you a way to actually pinpoint it.
Exactly. He makes it practical, which is what I love about his work. He wants you to apply this stuff, not just read about it.
It reminds me of those studies on millionaires. You know, so many of them, they're not just chasing money, they're doing stuff they're passionate about.
It's so true. It's about finding that alignment between your work and your values, what Tracy calls living congruently. And let's be real, that's a recipe for both happiness and success.
100%. But okay, let's get real for a second. Even when you're in that zone, life happens, right?
Yeah.
Challenges pop up.
Yeah.
So how does Tracy say we should deal with those curveballs to stay confident?
He's big on what he calls crisis anticipation. Basically, it's mentally prepping for obstacles so you can handle them with more grace and resilience.
Okay, so it's like not just waiting for things to go wrong,
Yeah.
but actively thinking about what could happen and having a game plan ready.
That's it. He uses the example of Napoleon, who was all about meticulous planning for every possible scenario on the battlefield.
Wow. Okay, so this isn't just some self-help fluff. This is like battle-tested strategy here.
Right. And the cool thing is, it totally applies to everyday life too. Career stuff, relationships, you name it. Identify the obstacles, figure out their potential impact, and then boom, develop strategies to tackle them.
So it's like having that mental toolkit ready to go. You might not need every tool, but you know what you've got, and that's got to be reassuring. But what about when, things actually do hit the fan? How do we keep our confidence from crumbling when those inevitable setbacks happen?
That's where Tracy's idea of a solution-oriented mindset comes in. Instead of dwelling on what went wrong, or worse, beating yourself up, you shift that focus to, okay, what can I learn from this? How can I move forward?
It's about turning those setbacks into opportunities, right?
100%. It's about growth.
Which takes us back to that idea of self-efficacy, that belief in your ability to figure things out.
Right. The more you believe you can handle whatever comes your way, the more confident you'll become.
It's like, you've got this.
Yeah.
Tracy also talks about the importance of learning from our mistakes, even going so far as to say they're not failures, but feedback.
He's totally right. Each mistake is a chance to learn, adjust, and get better. It's all part of the journey, right?
Absolutely. So we've got finding our zone of genius, anticipating those curveballs, and then reframing setbacks as opportunities. What else can we do to build that unshakable self-confidence? I feel like we've covered so much already, but I know there's even more, right?
Oh, yeah, there's more. Tracy goes deep on practical strategies. We've just scratched the surface. But one thing that really stood out to me was his personal story. He gets super real about his own journey to self-confidence, talking about his tough upbringing, making mistakes, feeling lost early on.
Wow, so he didn't just wake up one day with all the answers and perfect confidence.
Not at all. He had to work at it, just like anyone else.
Which makes his insights even more powerful, honestly. It's like, if you can overcome those challenges and build that level of confidence, then we can too.
Exactly. And his story really highlights this thing we all deal with, self-sabotage.
Oh, tell me about it. That inner critic can be brutal. It's like it wants to keep us small and safe, even if it means staying stuck.
Right. And Tracy's big on the importance of self-discipline in those moments. It's about recognizing those self-sabotaging tendencies and making a conscious choice to act in ways that support your goals, even when it's hard.
It's like, thank you, inner critic, for sharing. Now I'm going to do this anyway.
Exactly. And you know what? It gets easier with practice.
So we've covered a ton in this deep dive, from aligning with our values to handling setbacks like a boss. And now I'm really curious to hear more about those practical strategies Tracy offers for handling fear, dealing with criticism, and really mastering those essential qualities for success. Okay, ready to tackle those confidence gremlins. We left off talking about self-sabotage and the power of self-discipline. But I'm ready to dig into those practical strategies you mentioned, for handling things like fear and criticism.
Let's do it.
So let's talk about fear. It can be such a roadblock, right? It's like this invisible wall that keeps you from even trying.
Totally. And you'd think the goal would be to eliminate fear completely, but Tracy actually has a different take on it.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, he says instead of trying to get rid of fear altogether, try looking at it as a signal. Like, hey, you're about to step outside that comfort zone and move towards something meaningful.
Interesting. So it's like acknowledging that fear is a natural part of growth, not something to be avoided at all costs.
Exactly. True courage, according to Tracy, isn't about not feeling fear, but about taking action even when you do.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do we actually do that? How do we go from feeling paralyzed by fear to, like, okay, fear, I see you, but I'm doing this anyway?
Well, Tracy suggests starting by getting really specific about what's triggering that fear. Sometimes just naming it can take away some of its power, and then try to analyze it rationally.
Rationally. Like, have a little conversation with your fear.
Exactly. Ask yourself, what's the worst that could realistically happen if I do this thing I'm afraid of? Often we blow things way out of proportion in our heads.
Oh, 100%. Our minds are great at coming up with those worst-case scenarios, even if they're super unlikely.
Exactly. Once you've done that, Tracy recommends baby steps. Instead of trying to conquer the whole fear in one go, break it down.
Okay, so for example, if public speaking makes you want to crawl under a rock, you might start by practicing in front of a mirror. Then maybe ask a couple of friends to be your audience, and eventually work your way up to a bigger group.
That's it. It's gradual exposure, building that confidence through small wins along the way. And speaking of wins, Tracy's big on celebrating those too, no matter how small.
Oh yeah, those little victories are huge. They remind you that you are making progress, which keeps you motivated to keep going. Okay, so we've tackled fear, at least started to. What about handling criticism? That can be another confidence killer.
For sure. It's easy to take criticism personally, especially if it's unexpected or, not delivered in the nicest way.
Totally. But Tracy has some good tips for handling that too, right?
He does. He says the first step is to try and separate the criticism from the person giving it. Their feedback often says more about them, their own experiences and perspectives, than it does about you.
It's like that saying, everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about.
Right. So their words might have more to do with what's going on in their world than anything you did or didn't do. And Tracy also says it's smart to consider the source. Is this feedback coming from someone you respect? Someone who tends to give helpful criticism? Or is it someone who's just generally negative or doesn't really get your work?
Yeah, I've definitely learned to take some criticism with a grain of salt, especially if it's from someone who's always negative or doesn't really know me or my work.
It's a good skill to develop,
Yeah.
but even if the criticism is coming from a good place, you still have a choice. You can take it on board and use it for growth, or you can let it roll off. You don't have to accept every opinion that comes your way.
It's about boundaries, right?
Right.
Protecting your self-worth and not letting other people define you.
Exactly. And speaking of protecting your self-worth, Tracy has this great technique for dealing with those negative thoughts, that inner critic we talked about. He calls it the law of substitution.
Okay, now I'm really curious. Tell me more about this law of substitution.
It's pretty simple, actually. It's based on the idea that you can really only focus on one thought at a time. So if you catch yourself dwelling on something negative or you're just feeling down on yourself, you can consciously swap that thought for a more positive one.
So it's about intentionally shifting your focus from what's wrong to what's right, from what you lack to what you have.
Exactly. And like anything else, the more you practice this, the better you get at it.
It's like training your mind to go to a more positive and empowering place.
That's exactly it.
This has been so incredibly helpful. I feel like we've gotten this amazing toolkit for building self-confidence. We've talked about everything from getting clear on our values to setting goals that light us up, from facing our fears to handling criticism with grace. Is there anything we missed?
I think we covered the highlights.
Amazing.
But the real magic happens when you start applying this stuff in your own life, right?
Absolutely. So, to our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Brian Tracy's The Power of Self-Confidence. We've covered a lot of ground, but remember, building self-confidence is a journey, not a destination. Be kind to yourself along the way, celebrate those wins, and never underestimate the incredible power you hold within.